Hello, and welcome to Independent Audit's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion podcast series. My name is Omang Nain, and I'm a senior consultant here at Independent Audit. Through the work that we do on boards, the topic of DEI often comes up, particularly in relation to culture and succession planning. And I noticed that a lot of the time those discussions were focused around meeting a target or checking a box. And so I thought to myself, I took a step back and I thought, well, how can a board meaningfully engage with this topic and truly strive towards achieving greater diversity? Now, here at Independent Audit, we are not experts. And so that is where my guest today comes in. I am pleased to be joined by Krishna Grenville-Goble. Krishna has worked with KPMG for the last 20 years, and for the last 8 years has been focused on inclusion, diversity, and equity matters at board level for the KPMG Board Leadership Center. She has also helped to develop KPMG Connect on Board, which is a digital platform showcasing diverse candidates for board roles. And Krishna has also worked closely with the FTSE Women Leaders Review to improve gender balance in the FTSE 350 and private companies. Krishna, hello.
Hi, Omang. So lovely to join you for the podcast today.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights. So just to start off with, I mentioned there that you've been involved with the FTSE Women Leaders Review and focusing on gender diversity. And much of the discussion today is also going to be focused on that particular topic, i.e. gender diversity. So perhaps that would be a good place to start, actually. Why is that going to be the main focus of the discussion?
Well, with the FTSE Women Leaders Review, I think what we find is because the review has been taking place for a long number of years. I mean, I think it started in 2010. So, we've got a huge amount of data available, learnings, insight. It grew from having a relatively, compared to now, small number of FTSE companies submitting data to now having over, I believe it's 400 companies, the FTSE 350 and 50 large private companies in the UK submitting data. So what that gives us is a huge amount of data and insight over the years, and also a little bit of insight into how companies have been evolving their practices to enable more gender equality. So it's probably one of the best ways, if you've got a long study, to provide evidence on a journey of how diversity has been monitored, how business practices have evolved. It's not just about ticking boxes. What it's done is created awareness, benefited policies, obviously helped women progress, which was, the main point. But it's also about changing mindsets, changing cultures. And I think that's really important. I think sometimes we forget that, a review is not just about submitting data. It's actually for much bigger causes. And I think the review is such a great example of what can be achieved.
Great, thank you. So is it fair to say that it's probably the sort of most researched form of diversity in today's world?
I think so. I think when you look at sort of the international landscape in gender as well, the report actually always has had, I believe, an international comparators page. And when you look at the UK, it's clear to see that it is one of the it's one of the biggest studies. So it incorporates the largest number of companies, the largest number of individuals of any of the other countries, I believe. And so therefore, if you take that into account, if you look at the other reports, they're slightly lower in number of companies, lower in number of people that they're counting. And so it is, arguably one of the largest in the world. And so it is held up as a flagship review for that reason.
Great, that's really helpful to know. So bearing all that in mind, if we start with sort of quite a big question and maybe something that's on all our listeners' minds, which is, why does DEI matter to a business? Why are we talking about this? Why should people be talking about this?
I think if we go back to sort of the fundamental point of DEI, and one of the reasons that businesses focus on it is around talent management. It's around making sure that you have the best people to do the work that you need to do at the highest level, the best thinkers for your business to give you the competitive edge. You know, this is a business case, as strong as it is a moral and values and purpose-driven issue, and it's an integral part. I think the narrative has moved on in you know the past 10, 15 years as we've seen more work on different diversity characteristics, etc. That it has become an integral part of business practice to look after your talent. And I think it's fair to say that if you're looking after talent and you're also looking after your brand, your reputation, you're holding true to your values and purpose. But it has a very strong business case. You know, you want to be competitive, you want to be a good corporate citizen. All of those things matters. You want to retain good people. It makes business sense. It's cheaper to retain good people than it is to keep hiring and rehiring and going through that cycle. It's about fairness. It's about creating a level playing field, and fostering a sense of belonging. And I think those kind of words will start appearing more and more in D&I because if you take a step back, those different styles of thinking and experience, that cognitive diversity, not only from actually from the boardroom all the way throughout the organization, is so helpful when you're looking at markets, consumers, suppliers, the economy, risk, AI. You need a huge breadth of talent and skills, and so you want to widen that talent pool as much as possible. And I believe, you know, DEI helps you do that, but data is so key to that, which is why I'll keep referring to things like the FTSE Women Leaders Review, which means you are really focusing on what the data is telling you. And also what it's sort of highlighting, which is maybe there are some barriers to the way that you're going about hiring processes, retention, nurturing, training, learning, etc. It's all very interlinked. I don't think it can just be you can't just put DEI in a box on its own. It's very interlinked to other business practice. And I will also go back to sort of stakeholder expectation, and that's not just external stakeholders, that's graduates, new entrants, community, society, all of it. So DEI is really at the heart. If you think about people in your business, then DEI will also be, you know, very well connected to that. And if that's core to your business success, then I think DEI is you know hugely important.
Mm-hmm. And obviously this is a topic and that has been researched now for many years. In your view, how far have we come with DEI, i.e. what progress do you see that has been made?
I mean, I'll take the gender lens because obviously that's something I'm aware of. I think what it's done is held a mirror up to businesses to say, are we doing the right thing to create a level playing field in terms of gender and other characteristics? Are we making sure that everyone has the same opportunity in business? I think it's now, I would say those forward-thinking businesses, it's just an integral part of what they do. It's now shaping their policies and processes, and it's benefiting everybody. It's not just, you know, I think there is a danger that we focus on diversity characteristics and we get very siloed in that kind of thinking, and there is a sort of rhetoric that it's only about gender or ethnicity or you know, other characteristics. But this will benefit everybody. So things like women's maternity leave also has an effect on paternity leave as well. And so when you start improving processes, looking at the barriers, the structural barriers in the workplace, it's not people, it's often the barriers and the processes that restrict talent from coming through. And in our own work at KPMG, we've done a lot of work on social mobility. In fact, I was at a breakfast yesterday with board members talking about the importance of social mobility and what they can do as board members to provide an equality of opportunity, because often those people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have a different journey through their careers, and often they don't have the same networks and the same level of opportunities that people from higher socioeconomic backgrounds do. That's not to say that we're putting one against the other and it's a zero-sum game. What we're saying is it needs to be a leveler playing field, and at the moment it's not. So I think, how far have we come with IDE? I think we've come a huge way with IDE. I think there's a lot more work to do. You know, since 2010, when we hardly had, you know, I think the percentage of women on boards were in the single figures. We're now looking at hitting, you know, sort of 35, 40%. And some of those forward-thinking companies have already met that percentage. And some people I speak to think, you know, that if you think back to that level of change in organizations, it's incredible. It's incredible to say, you know, through focused monitoring of data analysis, not only looking at board and leadership level, looking at pipeline, looking at some of the feeder roles into the board, the things like you know, the group FD, the CFO, the head of HR, those really senior executive roles, you know, also need a balance of women, and that creates a strong pipeline. That would not have happened if we didn't have a focus on what the data was telling us. So, I mean, I don't think you can deny that the progress on you know, gender specifically has been great. And the same with what the Parker Review is doing on ethnicity. It's making sure that we have proper representation, and we're creating the right environment for talent. That's what businesses are doing through DEI. So I think we have come far, but there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I do want to come on to you know, what still needs to be addressed in just a moment. But what you said there ties in nicely to what I was going to ask next, which was around targets and legislation. How helpful do you think those are in the sort of, you know, in the fight for achieving greater diversity?
So I think targets and legislation are always helpful to focus the mind. But one of the things that we always talk about when we talk about FTSE Women Leaders Review, it's a voluntary business-led initiative, and it's backed by government. And what we sort of found throughout the years that I was working with the team was that it created a very healthy peer pressure, because businesses want to do the right thing. Government is raising this as an issue that they want to work on. I think everyone could see the benefit of having more women in the workplace in senior roles, going back to sort of, you know, this is about diversity of thought, it's about cognitive diversity, it's about different experiences and skill sets coming to the fore. It's about nurturing some great talent. Why would you want to waste that? You know, so I think targets give you a focus. I think the sort of government backing of the review gives it that kind of gravitas to say, look, this is something we really want to do. It kind of creates a pull and push pressure sort of from both sides to do the right thing. And it's a huge credential. I mean, why would you not want to say, look, we're doing really well on getting our women and men in businesses to senior grades, and really working on that. And then, as I said before, that also has a knock-on effect, because then it makes you look at the structural barriers in your organization. And sometimes, you know, even those traditional male-dominated industries, which are in the FTSE 350, which are part of the review, are working towards and putting things in place to help promote women. And I think the other thing to say is there's always a bit of an argument as to, well, it's all about women. You know, it's 40% women, so it's still 60% men. If you were taking it very simply, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but let's not forget, you know, we're not at sort of 50-50, and we're not saying that. I think the targets were set for a reason. So I think it is helpful. It's not about ticking boxes. And I think if you think it was about ticking boxes, then I sort of think you've missed the point a little bit. You know, this is more about changing mindset and ensuring that businesses are spotting the opportunity that they get by having more women in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like what you said about almost the peer pressure, right? That it's sort of encouraging companies to really do better in this area. So I think whenever I think of this targets, and I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, I think they have been really important so far. But like you said, you need to then go beyond just ticking the box, because that sort of then misses the overall point. And I just wanted to move on to then, what do you think still needs to be addressed? So you touched on this a little bit earlier. What work do we still need to do?
I think there is a huge amount of work to do in terms of maybe understanding, all of us as individuals, understanding our own biases that might come into some of the decisions we make. In terms of gender, there are still a myriad of challenges that women face as opposed to men. Men also have a huge role to play in this, and there are many organisations, bodies, spokespeople for men's side of this story, which we're not doing this in silo. We have to do it together. This is collaborative. Yeah. But if we just stick with the lens of gender, there was a report by Russell Reynolds that was analysing societal and media representation of CEOs. And I'm just giving you this example because I think sometimes media can often influence people's opinions. And that's an obvious sort of statement, but I think this is very important in terms of women in the media. The report showed that women in the media faced a higher level of scrutiny and unconscious bias than men did. Women CEO departures were twice as likely to be reported on and covered than men CEO departures. And given there are not many women CEOs in the UK, it becomes a big spotlight. Yeah. Men are described as innovators and women are described as inspirational. So we need to sort of see if men and women are being held to the same standards. And I think that report is worth having a look at, because some of the statistics really kind of uncovered this separation, or this kind of real difference in treatment between men and women. That also, has an effect on women in the workplace, how they're perceived, and their ambition could be curtailed because they're thought of in a certain way, and men are thought of in a different way, and they're not held to the same standards. So I think we've still got a lot of addressing to do. I mean, there's microaggressions, there's women's health, there's men's health. There are still things in the workplace that need to be improved so that we can retain the best talent and we can have the right people coming up through the workplace. But I'd also say that social mobility is a huge topic that, maybe it's for another podcast, but social mobility is a huge factor in leveling the playing field, in ensuring that we get talent from across the UK coming up through businesses and interested in business. I think that's really important. I think boards have got a bit of work to do there in ensuring that they're looking at that in their organisations.
The portrayal of women in the media, I think, is a really interesting point, because just as you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, immediately I have an example in my head where I recall, I think it was last year, a bank collapsed, and it was eventually found it was because of inadequate risk management and because of some, investment strategies which didn't pan out to be as effective as they could have been. But before those conclusions were reached, there was all this going on in the media about the fact that it was a female CEO. And not only was it a female CEO, it was a female CEO who very proudly and was quite outspoken about the fact that she was a lesbian. And was very proud of the fact that this was a bank and an organization that, had a lot of DEI initiatives. And I think, there was some reputable sources, some reputable news agencies which were reporting as, this organization got distracted by by DEI initiatives. This organization, the CEO was too busy focused on the fact that she was a lesbian. And I was thinking to myself, if this was a bank that collapsed with a man as the CEO, there wouldn't have been a discussion, he was too focused on DEI. They would have immediately gone to the actual reason, i.e. risk management. So I think it's a really important point, because these are things we see in the day-to-day. These are things we read about, especially when they're coming from, very well-regarded sources as well.
Yeah, I think there is it paints a picture and it creates a perception between men and women. I think there was a piece of research, I may be wrong, but that sort of says, women are put in CEO posts when an organization is on a downward trajectory, which, gives you the sort of phrase, are they being set up to fail in the first place? Now, I don't want to sort of say that is, the common reason, but we have to look at that as well. So I think we need to take a much more balanced view of what's going on in organizations before we start to put DEI as a sort of reason for failure. I think if organizations were really putting DEI at the heart of it, you'd see it on board agendas much more often than probably is the reality.
And I wanted to just pick up on one other thing that you had mentioned, which I think is really important, which is around the thing of, this is a collaborative discussion. When we talk about gender diversity, for example, it's not just women who should be talking about this, right? We got to bring in everybody else into the conversation as well.
It is a busy there's so many things on the agenda at the moment. I mean, goodness knows how many things are on the board agenda now. In the last 6 months, it must have exploded. So I totally understand that DEI may not have had the sort of airspace that it might do on boards. However, with this particular topic, I feel that maybe a deep dive session with their head of DEI or external specialists in the area is worth the time. It's worth time because what it does is it creates an environment of psychological safety for people to understand language, to understand how this is a fast-moving discussion, to understand both sides of the story. There are a lot of things going on with ethnicity. There's a lot of things going on with gender as well. So you have this environment where women are, there's a big focus on women, and the men are saying, well, what's our role? Does that mean we're going to have less jobs? Does that mean we're going to not be thought about when it comes to board roles? And the way I sort of see it is, there was a playing field that was not level. So now it's level. We have the right healthier version of a competitive environment for roles where we didn't before. And that's good for business because they're getting the right talent through the door, right? So I think there is a responsibility for everyone to do a bit of learning and a bit of education. There are ways to do that, which creates psychological safety. I think the other thing you can do is talk to your employee networks. I mean, we have a huge amount of networks in KPMG. They are open to everybody. So it's not sort of, even if you have the LGBTQ plus network, you have disability network, they're open to everybody, because the point of that is that we learn from each other and we respect each other's point of view. That's really important. And the use of language can also be something that you can just be honest about and say, look, I don't really know this much. Can you tell me from your point of view what would be respectful for me to use in your particular situation? I don't think anyone could go wrong with that.
Yeah, and I think the culture point there is a really good one, because from the perspective of, a board member, how are you sort of finding out what the culture is like on the ground in terms of, that environment of, is there an environment where these topics are being aired? Is there an inclusive environment? And I think as a board member, right, it's your responsibility to have enough knowledge to be comfortable that the organization is in a good place in that respect. Um, and something else I wanted to talk about was common pitfalls for boards. So, where do you sort of see gaps between how well we think we're doing versus how well we're actually doing in practice?
I think that comes through really the real evidence of the gap, or if there is one, that there normally is one, is feedback. And I
Hmm.
think genuine feedback, again, I'm going to come back to that psychological safety environment, because I think to get genuine feedback, you need to have that environment and that culture of openness and willingness to learn and do something about it. So I think one of the one of the common pitfalls for business is that there is no accountability at a leadership level for DEI, whether you're looking at it through sort of diversity characteristics or more holistically as well. I think you need a voice either on the board or the nomination committee or somebody providing that feedback, and maybe some rigorous reporting to the board in terms of things like progression rates and how DEI is helping to, ensure that we have good representation throughout an organization. I think that the other very valuable thing is looking at the feedback of people leaving as well as the feedback of people who have just joined. I think leaders'
Right.
feedback is really undervalued. I know it's a bit too late then because they're sort of out the door, but however, it is a really valuable piece of information. Um, I think that not understanding some of the issues about DEI that are wider, not just in your organization, but wider in society, will help businesses to sort of understand the bigger impact of what they're trying to achieve. And also, I think if you have a misalignment with your DEI and your values and purpose, so if you are thinking about that tick box mentality, but your values and purpose say something else, you're going to get a difference in expectation, and brand and reputation and, credibility, because your brand promise when you recruit people has to be realized when they enter the office, right? So if you're saying you're a fair, equal opportunity, sort of employer, that you believe in DEI, and you get hires that are then sort of disappointed by what they
Yeah.
experience. That's hugely, damaging to the brand and the culture. So I think that those are the kind of things to look out for.
Yeah. And is that what you've just described? Is that what you would call sort of DEI washing?
Um, yes, a little bit if we're not careful of how we look at the processes.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really key thing, that when you look at the recruitment process, look at the whole thing, from the wording you use for a role to the culture that you're bringing somebody into. And of course, we're going to put, our businesses in a great light, and we want to deliver on that brand promise. I don't think anyone, doesn't want to do that. But I do think that if somebody comes into an organization and they have been, told that there's sort of equal opportunity for whatever background and diverse characteristic you may have. And by the way, we're not just one diverse characteristic, we're all diverse characteristics,
Yeah.
each and every one of us. But if you then see that your progression is stalling in an organization, then you would question, some of the work being done, and is it really a fair place to work? And I think I'm going to go back to sort of social mobility. KPMG did a huge piece of research on over, I believe it was 16,000 people over a 5-10 year kind of period, which showed that there was a slower rate of career progression for those people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds than there was from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. And without that research, without the data, going back to my point in terms of how powerful data is, we wouldn't have been able to create interventions, and we wouldn't be able to understand where the kind of barriers were to progression and who it was affecting. And by the way, we also looked at the intersectional range of that. So we looked at specific groups of gender and ethnicity, etc., and looked at their progression rates as well. So and their socioeconomic background. And without that, we wouldn't have been able to see where the barriers were and do something about it. You know, that the key thing is somebody I met recently was saying one of the interesting things in annual reports is not so much the data, but what organizations are doing about creating a fairer workplace. And often those are really valuable, because if they're sharing that information, other businesses can learn from that and take things forward. So, you know, it's like I said, it's work in progress.
And as I, talk to non-executive directors, chairs, etc., anyone really, there are still reasons for cynicism around this topic. There are still, what you would call sort of excuses. Oh, well, we don't have that for X, Y, and Z reason. And I'd just like to touch on a couple of those. And if I may, I'll offer a recent example I had where, we were doing a board effectiveness review. And again, as part of it, we sort of asked, as a board, what's your view on how this organization is tackling this topic? And the response we got from multiple people was, oh, actually, well, our CEO really believes in meritocracy as opposed to diversity. So his focus is on meritocracy. And I was taken aback because I thought to myself, I have never thought of meritocracy and diversity as two opposing or conflicting concepts. I don't think they need to be one or the other. I think they can very much run side by side. So again, I'd love to hear your view on this meritocracy versus diversity debate.
Yeah, it's a great one, and it's a great question. And I think, I'm hearing it a lot at the moment as we're sort of seeing changes to approaches to DEI, across the world. But I think that one of the key things I would say about meritocracy is that it assumes that you're looking at the widest talent pool of people, and then you have a meritocracy.
Right.
In my view, the only way you can get a meritocracy, and the only way you're looking at the whole talent pool, is if you have the data to show you have a whole talent pool represented when you're taking a meritocratic view of your talent. And so I think, yes, absolutely meritocracy. It is an aspiration. I still think it's an aspiration. I don't think it's true. Unless you show me that the data from your DEI and your population in the workplace is truly as representative as you can make it. And then I think you can say you have the right approach, and it's about meritocracy. So I think it can be achieved, but I think it should always be absolutely at the forefront of your mind. But just bear in mind that when you look at your talent pool, it has to be representative in order for you to say that you have a meritocracy.
Very interesting. Okay, thank you. And more widely, so not just the meritocracy debate, but more widely, when do you sort of see these, reasons for cynicism and excuses pop up the most?
I think it's, going back to our very earlier kind of conversation, is that when businesses haven't integrated DEI into their processes and policies, I think you'll find it's very easy to sort of backtrack and go, well, actually we don't need to deal with that because we're leaning on meritocracy. I think that would be very difficult to do. Well, it's easy to do, but very difficult to kind of justify because then if you've not got DEI and you've not got this mechanism to create fairness and equal opportunity and make sure you understand some of the barriers affecting people from different backgrounds. What you then have to demonstrate, I believe, is that you are being fair in how you recruit and how you train and how you promote people and give them equal opportunity. So how do you evidence that without data? How do you prove that you're being fair? How do you attract people to your organization? Um, and provide them with the insight into how you can help them progress in their careers if you don't have sort of the data to back it up. So I think there's a little bit of make sure that's thought through if you're going to, be a bit cynical about DEI and want to sort of put all that work to waste, which I think is just, I just feel it's so integral to business now that it would be very difficult to do that, however people are thinking about that. Also, I think sometimes, and this is probably me being a bit cynical, if people don't see the benefit to them, they often find it easier to sort of switch off from the discussion and sort of be a little bit cynical about it. But that's also a big opportunity. So often if you're cynical about something in business, if you're cynical about AI, if you're cynical about a particular risk or an opportunity, the business practice is to do some due diligence, right? So surely if you are cynical about something, you would test out some of the evidence, you would test out some of the lived experience from people. So test your hypothesis of cynicism, I would say, and then come back and sort of maybe reevaluate some of that thinking.
Krishna, it's been a great discussion so far, and I want to end on one sort of perhaps quite a large and bold question, which is how can we create genuine, lasting change?
That is a massive question. Great one to finish off with.
Yeah, just an easy one to end on. Yeah,
an easy one to end off with. So I think a couple of key points. DEI is always around creating the best performing team, the best performing people in your organization. That's what it's there to do. It's there to say, let's bring each other up and support each other as allies to make sure we've got the best talent coming through. And that could be from any background, and everyone should have the same opportunity. The reality is that that wasn't happening, and therefore DEI has a place in your organization to create that fairness. It doesn't have to be large, massive campaigns and actions. It can be small things if you get under the skin of what people are finding difficult. So it can be on everybody's agenda, and that can be quite a powerful thing if we all embrace that and we believe it's in the fairness of the workplace. But I think it's also around culture and that culture of respect, understanding, inclusivity, belonging. And boards have a very big role in setting that tone from the top.
Yeah.
And it's also about, good corporate governance. So when we're talking about creating genuine, lasting change, businesses want, sustainable, strong, growing businesses. And I think that comes down to good corporate governance. And good corporate governance also means that you treat people fairly. And boards lead the way. So, there is best practice. Lots of organizations have done really creative things in DEI, improved the business environment, improved the workplace, broken down barriers. I mean, we still have, and I still say we've got a lot of work to do because there are businesses at different sort of paces on this agenda.
Yeah.
We all have a lot to learn from each other. So I think the data, I'm going to go back to data because I believe that is key. It's not the only thing, but it is key. But also providing people with a variety of work experience and opportunities to do that work. So allocating work to people so they get the experience is really key. Probably more key than almost the data is are you giving people equality of opportunity?
And I think as a board, it has a role to play in many of the things that you've described, right? So when you're looking at talent management, recruitment or management, it's the board's sort of responsibility to ensure that those practices are happening in an inclusive way, that people are being recruited, the sort of process for recruitment is is inclusive. And then I think that cultural point, which we mentioned earlier, is incredibly important. As a board member, do you have your ear to the ground around, the culture and the values of the organization? Yes, you're seeing the values on paper, and perhaps inclusion is one of the main pillars and value of the organization. Then is that actually being lived within the organization? I think as a board, it's really important to have awareness of that. And yeah, frankly, you're setting the tone from the top, right? As a board, are you as a board yourself, are you also creating an inclusive environment? Are you also, sort of creating the kind of environment you want for the organization? So I think, there's a big role to play there. Right, we've covered a lot of ground, Krishna. So thank you very, very much. It has been so great to hear your insight and your knowledge. As I'm sure the listeners can tell, this is a very broad topic. And so I'm actually pleased to say that Krishna is going to be joining us for part 2, where we're going to be focusing more on the sort of practical side of things and the role that a board member and particularly a chair can play in achieving greater diversity. I hope you all learned from this as much as I did with Krishna's great experience. And we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear your questions and thoughts and comments about this topic. So please do, leave some comments and let us know what you think. And in the meantime, we look forward to seeing you in part 2. Thank you very much for joining us. And Krishna, thank you once again.
Thanks, Omang. It's been a pleasure.